Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, the co-author of The Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you can find at theoryofdfs.com. Join with me as usual, Neil Orfield. I'm finally up on the year now. I went from 15K down to 20K up, all because of MMA.
I didn't see that you had a big win in MMA.
I mean, big depends on what you consider big. I mean, 35,000.
I mean, yeah, relatively big for what you're playing. To take you from negative to positive on the year, it would take me at this point, I think, more than 100,000 to get positive on the year.
You're down that bad?
I think I might be up this month too. I had a really bad January, sort of bad February. I mean, that's not out of unusual for me. I think last year I was probably down about the same amount at this time of the year. So
right, your swings are much larger than mine. So yeah. Six-figure swings are more normal, and me, low five-figure are more normal. Right. 15 to 30. That'll happen a couple of times.
So 35,000 for you is a big help in terms of getting to your goal of 70,000 ish for the year.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Cut into my debt slightly.
The weird thing is that it was not in the large field contest. It was in. I typically on MMA slates build 3 like smaller field, if you want to call them, type. I play like the 555. The $200 3 max, the $100 single entry, the 55, like there's a whole bunch, like 55, and I just basically have 3 lineups, and I try like 555, and then the other 2 are in a bunch of other stuff. And then they have like the secondary contests. So you have like the $8 5,000 entry contest. I'll put all those 3 entries into those and across the board into everything. And then they had the secondary $15 contest. So I put all 3 entries into there. And then one of those 3 lineups was like the 6th nut lineup, which would have came in like 13th in the large field for not all that much, $650 or something.
Right.
But it was the solo winner of like the secondary contest for 10,000 and like all of the single entry 3 max contests, including an MMA qualifier.
Oh, nice. Oh yeah, I did. I think I did see that. I saw that you won a qualifier. Have you won 2 qualifiers, or is that the one that I?
No, that's the only MMA one I've won.
Was it not this weekend, but the weekend before then?
Yeah, it was the weekend before.
Okay,
right, because we do every other week.
I did see that.
Right,
that's funny because we talked about whether you would go to a live final. Do you think you'll go to this one?
Well, I mean, it's a qualifying process. So, like, it's 70 qualifiers, and then it's 3 rounds. So the first round, they eliminate 70 to 30. The second round, they eliminate 30 to 10. And then those 10 go to the where to be determined location or whatever. But I mean, it's a minimum payout of $2,000, even if I got knocked out in last place in the first round. But the qualifiers are cheaper in MMA. It's only an $8,200 seat.
Right.
So it's like they have like 31-man qualifiers of like $400, and then they have like $100 qualifiers of 111 or something. I mean, like it's not that costly. And I qualified it was like 560-man $20 entry. So I just threw all 3 lineups into that. Give me that, and wherever it is, because I'm typically each of those lineups end up at around $500 a piece. So I just play those, and I mean, I'm always pretty much going to do well when the biggest favorite, the most owned favorite, and the most owned underdog both lose. So like it was one of those types of slates. Well, as opposed to this past weekend, where where like if anyone was 40+% owned, they did well.
Yeah, I was rooting pretty hard against Jack Shore winning, even though I had more of him than the other guy. Was about half the field, so did not like when he put up a big score.
Right. I played a decent amount of Shore. I was still under, but I played much less of Paul Craig, who was the other, like, he was like a 41% owned underdog.
Yeah.
Because there were 5 humongous dogs on the slate. It was one of those cards where the 5 top guys were like minus 400 or above.
Right.
And the way that Paul Craig fights is that if he doesn't get a submission, his opponent typically puts up a humongous score. So I played Krylov. I played a ton of Krylov at like 80. It was 8,700, and he could have easily scored 120 had Paul Craig just been content with staying on his back and trying to get a submission for 3 rounds while getting pummeled in the face.
Yeah.
But he got a submission, and then there goes that.
I played a lot of Luana Carolina, and I started watching the fight, and I was like, I can't even envision a way that this woman wins. Like, she just, like, the way she was fighting, just, she looked scared, like she wasn't trying to make contact, and then when she did, it was kind of like weak jabs. I was like, I can't even imagine what would have to happen for this woman to win. So
yeah, she's not very good. No, but your assessment of, like, obviously we're using some form of projection in a way. Obviously I use more betting lines versus ownership type of thing. But overall in MMA, main event fighters are typically overowned and female fighters are typically underowned, and the highest variance fights are heavyweights and female fights. So I just wanted to shout out Will and Jordan over at SaberSim. Recently last week did a video, like a 50-minute long video. Will was putting together their MMA model. And the week that I won a lot, Will, reformed racer, he won the large field contest for 100,000 solo. His first week of doing of putting out his MMA model. So it's very similar to me, like last year. Like, oh, I might as well update my stuff in Excel and try to do this much better. And then the week after, winning 116,000. But they put out a video that, other than the fight data simulations that they do, essentially that process that Will does is a more advanced version of exactly what I do. Like literally. But they're doing they're like, obviously I'm not doing sims. And also I'm not doing sims based on the fighting metrics of like strikes absorbed and all that, punches thrown and takedown, defense. They do all of that and they simulate the fights. Right. And then they run, 10,000, 100,000, whatever like that. And then they calculate duplication and all that type of stuff to give, the expected value type of lineups.
They calculate duplication within SaberSim? I didn't realize that.
I'm not. I mean, they discussed it on the video at least. Okay. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what goes into what shows on their screens because I don't use SaberSim. But like just the overall process of like he's using betting lines as far as when finishes happen, and then how much do they score in wins versus other fighters, and then combining ownership to say how duplicated is this lineup going to be. It's like he talked it all out, and it's like other than the fight simulations, it's pretty much exactly what I do. I mean, I hack through it by making my own little projection rating in order to get that all together. But they also talk about just general MMA, DFS strategy, playing exploitatively. I mean, essentially, it's an exploitative style. And based on his back testing, I was assuming he's doing something a little bit more data-driven than me, anecdotally driven of, been playing MMA for almost 2 years, that heavyweight fights are the most variant because anyone can get knocked out and because they throw hard. So like when in doubt, I'll take the heavyweight that is underowned than a featherweight. Those fights typically don't get knocked out at 125 or whatever, 135.
What is the main event typically? Is it a heavyweight?
It could be anything. I mean, typically the main event is just whatever fight for a normal fight night. It could be just the two most named fight, like whatever they
Okay.
believe is the car, you know, that most eyeballs. And pay-per-views, it's almost always a title fight, right? And typically they may even have 2 or 3 title fights. So there's no well, this could be a weight. I mean, Shevchenko could be a main event, and she's a 125. You know, it could be that. That could be the main event.
Right.
It just title fights are 5 rounds, and main events on fight nights are 5 rounds. That's the only difference. But heavyweight fights typically are high variance, means the range of outcomes is extremely wide, because heavyweight fights typically don't have much volume, but they could be a KO at any time.
Right.
So you either basically, if heavyweights, you care pretty much entirely on the first round. So like in the first round, either of these guys could get a knockout. But once it goes to the second and third round, this fight's not going to have enough volume that in a decision, these fighters are not going to be optimal.
Interesting.
So like for this past slate, like I didn't mind playing a little bit more of Shamil Abdurakhimov, who's old and horrible, but it's a heavyweight fight. We have horrible dogs down in that range. I'd rather take a shot on someone like that or a female. I played a bunch of Elise Reed, who was a little bit more expensive.
I did too.
Because typically the lines on women's fights are too wide. Because other than a couple of really top women's fighters, most of the division is very close to one another. So if there's going to be some type of upset, it may come in a women's fight. And also the UFC stats service, this is anecdotal, but maybe it could be proven, counts more strikes as significant for women that they wouldn't count for men.
Okay.
So, like, yeah, you still get the strikes, but as far as, like, it seems like any strike in a women's fight is considered significant. Yet in a men's fight, you may see someone with 130 strikes, 46 significant. So you don't get the extra point, too.
Luana Carolina and see if any of those were counted as significant strikes.
Then they probably are.
Because I didn't see many, yeah.
Right, but I mean, they probably counted as them. And then the other thing is that the main event typically is overowned.
Yeah. I think I had 100% of the main event, which was not, it's because, so I understand that in MMA, like projections are not worth all that much. I mean, so I changed projections quite a bit. I think I cut off 10 fantasy points on the projection of both of them. And like, because I do it pretty incrementally, I think I still ended up with at or near 100% on the main events.
Only because they were in the mid range. Because you got a main event fight that was 8,300, 7,900. You wouldn't have gotten that if it was a much bigger favorite. The thing about the slate yesterday, I've been experimenting in Excel with. I've been working so much more on MMA than on any sport I think I've ever. I mean, it's probably the most edge if you can figure it out, because it hasn't been around that long and there aren't that many like pros who like focus on MMA. At least that's my impression. I could be totally wrong about that, but I don't feel like there are that many guys who I think of as being like, this is an MMA guy. Like their main sport is MMA. Well, they could be main sport MMA, but they may not be a 150 max MMA. It may be they play the high stakes, cash games, stuff like that. But I like MMA because it has very similar dynamic to Showdown without correlation. Because the hardest part for me, only because my Excel skills are not high, and I don't know R, and I don't know Python. I mean, I could probably get very basic Python from my past experience, but I mean, I'm almost 20 years removed from doing any form of like coding like that. The correlation is the hardest part of simulating anything, of running, lineups, how correlated are the players to each other. But in MMA, there's zero correlation other than 2 fighters in the same fight, right? Only one person can win. But the fighters to each other, I don't care about. There's no correlation of that. So I'm able to like create and lineups in Excel, just combinations in Excel that I don't have to worry about. Well, if this quarterback's put this wide receiver in, it just fill up as 50K max and Give me all the combinations of all the fighters that don't have two of the guys in the same fight.
And you're doing this on your own in Excel?
Yes.
You don't use an optimizer at all for...
No, I do use... No, I'm talking about my experiments.
Okay.
Like, this is not what I'm doing to create lineups. I'm doing exactly what I'm doing, what I've always done, at least for the past, 9 months to build lineups. By using my spreadsheet, creating a leverage score, and then building lineups based on that score.
Okay.
But the thing that I'm missing, which I've learned intuitively, but I wanted to kind of prove out the stuff that I have thought about intuitively. And like, for instance, on this past slate, I calculated, just purely based on betting lines, that about 70% of the time, one of those five big underdogs would win. Because just based on the betting lines, if you just do a simple, a P calculation,
yep.
Like, all you have to do is go. Here are the probabilities of, based on the money line odds,
right? And
then go at least 1 of 5 win. That number was like 70%. 30% of the time, all 5 favorites will win.
And these are the biggest 5 favorites, the biggest discrepancies.
Right, and they're all the 9K fighters up there. So, like, on those types of slates, it's the main reason where I say I prefer the slates where the biggest favorite is not that big of a favorite, where the 9K fighters are more like minus 220, like minus 200, minus 250 at the max, rather than, we had minus 600, minus 580, guys with 78, 82% win chances rather than 70% win chances. Because people on those slates, there's so many more combinations of probable winning lineups than on slates like we saw this past Saturday. But that's the main reason why in Excel I've been working on back test. I don't know if you want to call it back testing, but comparing the. I'm doing it in a very Florida way. If you want to hear me explain it, I don't know if you're interested. I'm not using fight data, so I don't have any way of scoring decision wins properly.
Okay.
So I could go by round 1 finishing odds, round 2 finishing odds, round 3 finishing odds, and then decision odds on every fighter, right? And then the money line is the win. How often, if 80-20, 20% of the time this guy wins. How often is it in the first round, second round, third round? Now, obviously, first round, you get 90 points. Second round, you get 70. Third round, you get 45. And obviously, 40 and 40 for the 5-round fights. What I do is I would take the mean projection, the aggregate of all of the fighters that I have, come up with a middle number of that, and based on how much that mean projection is above or below that middle number, determines how many points that I'm assigning per round to that fighter. So that's that to me, that's the strikes and everything. So the guys that are obviously higher projected, like a 5-round fight, get more points per round.
Sure.
And the guys that have poor projections get less points per round, but they'll still get some points. So like a big underdog may score, 6-7 points per round, but in a first round win, that's like 97, right?
Okay. Yep.
Right, something like that. But like the top end guys, if they win in the first round, they're getting like 112. Right. So I'm able to balance based on that, where it's not just first round winners are just 90 no matter who you are, right? Yeah. So you get the higher priced guys get the higher projected guys, which tend to be the higher priced guys anyway.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do, I can't simulate the contests because I'm just not skilled enough to do that. But I could, based on those probabilities, I could simulate the score of a lineup compared to a target score.
Right.
So based on the money line odds, the round 1, round 2, round 3 odds, I can now simulate like 20, it could be like 18% of the time this guy wins in round one. It could be more like 8% of the time this guy wins in round one. 12% of the time he wins in round two. 14% of the time in round three. 16% time in decision, and he's a plus 130 underdog. So that all would equal like 46% total. Like 45%. So because the other guy will have 55% of the time he wins, right? So based on that and based on the projection, then each and every time I run a sim of that fight, of those fighters, it'll come up like 92, 46, whatever it is that the added per round. Because if it's a first round win for that guy, it'll always be 112. It'll never be like 105. Because I'm just basically saying if it's a first round win, it's 90 plus this score. Right? And if it's a third round win, it's 45 plus this score times 3. Right? Because it's 3 different rounds. I mean, it's like I said, that's not how you should be doing it. Just that's the only way that I could kind of hack through. And then what I'll do is I could create every single lineup combination. Mm-hmm. So I'll create every single lineup combination that there is where 2 fighters are not in the same lineup. Although I could do ones, obviously, that stack fights or whatever, but I'm never playing those lineups. So to me, it doesn't even matter what I calculate. And then I could run 1,000. My way of doing it in Excel is absurdly slow. So like if I were to do 10,000, it would take me all day. I could do 1,000 in an hour. Like it's really slow. Even creating the lineups.
MMA, you have that time though. You can do
right. In MMA, I have that time. I mean, even creating lineups. I mean, MMA for like 26 fighters on a slate still takes me like an hour and a half to get all the lineups. Yeah. If you do it in like R or Python, you could probably do it in like 3 seconds. But I mean, I just don't know how to do that. So
you can't hire somebody?
I mean, yes, I technically can. You're right, I can, but I don't want to have to rely on. Anytime I want to do this, I have to give it to someone else, or I have to run something like this is not important. I'm not doing this to create lineups. I'm doing this to experiment with slate dynamics.
Right.
So I would run all the lineups and then run the simulation like that, and then come up with a target score of 600, 620, 58, whatever I want, and go what percentage of the time does this lineup hit that score? Okay. Then I could download the CSV of the contest standings from the slate to see what the actual lineups are in the contest.
So like the next day you're doing this.
Right. That's why I said this is not something that I could do in general. But I mean, I could do it. I could do it beforehand just to get those numbers of the probability of this lineup hitting X score. So if I would set it at 600, I go, here's 40,000 lineups. Simulate this 1,000 times, and tell me the scores of each time this lineup runs. How many of those 1,000 is it 600 plus? And I'll get a number on each lineup. And then after the slate, what I could do is then compare the actual lineups in the contest. And say, this person's 150 lineups. How many of their lineups score over 620 points X percentage of the time? I'm not even factoring duplication because that's not the purpose of what I'm just experimenting with slate dynamics.
Right.
And from what I found, at least in the way that I'm doing it, is that my instincts are correct. Okay. So for instance, on this past slate, where we had 5 9K fighters that were like minus 400 and above, that any lineup that left more than $1,500 on the table didn't win often enough.
Okay.
Only because there's 5 fighters that could at the high range that could score so many points that the only way for those lineups to win is if like the mid-range guys outscore the 9K guys,
right,
and one of the underdogs puts up like, enough points. Like that.
I was actually just about to ask you about that, whether you have tested at all the salary limitations. Like, so I was looking at Top Pros, I was looking at yours, I was looking at Bricks, I looked at several different people, and the only one that I saw that I think had a salary cap at all was Brick. I don't think you had one. I think he had a 49,800 or something, like a very minimal cap on the salary of his lineups.
What, the cap, max cap or min cap?
Max cap.
Oh yeah, I never have a max cap.
Yeah. So I do only in Showdown, and I've been trying to think about this lately, whether it's a mistake. So the first time that I played MMA, or actually tried to play seriously, I did a little study beforehand and looked at a couple of the pros in the previous week's contest and saw that Steve Buzzard had like a cap of, I don't know, 49,400 or something. So I took away from that. Well, he had just won recently prior to that in MMA too. So I thought maybe that's what you need to do in MMA to get unique, is put a max cap on your salary. So I've been doing that, but I've been kind of wondering if I'm making a mistake. Like, I'm getting unique. I look at my lineups. I'm like, okay, I'm happy with the number of my lineups that are unique or under 5 dupes. But then I'm also wondering all the time, like, but do they have any chance of winning? Like, I just don't know if I'm.
Well, that's the key that I'm. First off, you could find unique lineups that spend 50K depending on the slate.
Yeah,
there are combinations that are, so like, that's the reason I don't have a max cap. But I used to have if you're going to judge your play in MMA solely on uniques, I think that's flawed based on what the slate dynamics. So for instance, I saw a bunch of lineups. I downloaded the CSV, and I do this literally 1 minute after lock. Just so I want to see my uniques, my under 5 dupes, and I mean, you can go to sports-projections.com, you can do it quickly like that. But then I'll download the actual lineups from some of the people that have like 126 uniques. And then I'll reference that target score probabilities, and they have a ton of lineups that I don't are negative EV. Are 40 lineups that are absolutely unique. So this past slate, a lineup that has 3 of the heaviest underdogs in the same lineup, 1 9K fighter and 2 Volkov and McCann, and it leaves like 2,600 on the table. But it is unique, but you could get lineups that are just as unique, that have 3 times higher probability of hitting X score, which to me is the winning because I'm just going by, because I'm not simulating the contest. I'm just like, how often this lineup scores 600 points type of thing.
And that's the balance you're always trying to find, right? In these kind of contests, is you want to be unique, but you also want to have lineups that have a reasonable probability of winning.
Right, but the problem comes in on some slates like this past one, where the lineups that are like that, there pretty much are none. And you see that the increased win probability, in quotes, if you want to call it, that, like, on Saturday, I felt that it was a slate that I was focused more on finding lineups that were under 5 than being unique.
Yep.
Like, it was because I'm looking and going, as you decrease your salary, it's exponentially getting worse from a win probability perspective. So, like, a lot of people, like, and I'm in another Discord, they go, well, balance builds are going to be, so many people are going to do, like, the common build is going to be 2 9K guys, a main event fighter, and Shore, Craig, something like that. Obviously, that lineup did great because everything hit. But so people are like, well, instead of doing that, I'm going to go balance. Instead of having to play, I don't want to play any of the low underdogs. So I'm going to sacrifice a 9K fighter in order to play McCann, Krylov, like, play one of the 9K fighters, and then playing a Carolina, basically going mid-range, and those lineups are like 3 times less likely to get the same amount of points, and most likely have the same amount. Like you're trading in one lineup that's duplicated 4 times with another lineup that's duplicated 5 times or 6 times, but has a 3 times higher likelihood of getting 600 points.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that, and it's like on these types of slates, and it's only because of the slate dynamic. So every slate will have a different dynamic like that. On the slates that I love, where the $9,400 fighter is a minus 200 favorite, it's only a 66% chance. Those are the slates where you can leave 3,000 on the table.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's probably this was not the slate to leave salary on the table.
Right, but a lot of quote sharp players. Wow, I got 120 uniques, and you see that a lot of their lineups are leaving 1,500, 2,000 on the table. And while they are unique, the win probability of them are so insanely low. And then you have also have the problem that this past slate, 70% of the time, one of those underdogs win. Now, if one of those underdogs win, the most likely combination that takes down something is going to be three 9K fighters, the one underdog of the other 2 fighters that lost, and a main event fighter. But the problem, and all of those big underdogs were all underowned. Yeah. The problem is, I don't know which one of the 5 is the hell's going to win, right?
Right.
But I 70% of the time, one of them wins. So I built a lot of lineups that were basically just mixing and matching, right? If I didn't have Dupourier in the lineup, I had Herbert in the lineup, right? If I didn't have Pavlovich, I had Abdurahimov. If I didn't, whoever was the opposite of one another. And then in the lineups where I didn't do that, where I played 2 9K fighters, I didn't play the main event. I had lineups that avoided the main event because that was going to be high. Like a way to do that, because I saw, based on the win probability of the win, I call it win probability. Really, it's the probability of X score, and I just set it for 600. Right. It could be 620. It could be whatever you want to put in. Because typically you're aiming for 100 average out of each of your fighters. Yeah. And I found on that type of slate that most likely most of my lineups are going to be 49.5 plus, and most likely most not unique. But if I could avoid massive trains or anything, that's the better middle ground between playing. It's just like in Showdown, right? You play Showdown. You could play a lineup in Showdown that's 40,000, leaving 10K on the table. You will be unique, but depending on the context of a slate, imagine the Super Bowl slate with 2 condensed offenses, and you're like, now I'm going to leave 10K on the table. Like, the difference between that lineup and a 48-8 lineup that is duplicated 15 times is like, yeah, you're right. The other one is unique. But it's the other lineup is going to win more than 15 times more likely than that lineup that is projected for like 40 points below it, that it isn't worth it. You like the slates, Neil, I'm assuming, in Showdown, where the offenses are not condensed, where there's multiple, there's running back by committees, there's 4 wide receivers and 2 tight ends that still get decent target shares. You like that type of stuff.
Those are my favorites, yeah, for sure.
Right, but it's the same concept.
Oh yeah, it's exactly the same concept. For me, MMA, I don't really know what I'm doing, and I'm kind of doing trial and error. Is sort of my approach.
Well, that's what I did in the beginning.
Yeah, and now it seems like you're getting pretty advanced, and what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I'm curious though. So you mentioned you looked at lineups that leave 1,500 or more on the table, have virtually no chance of winning. But did you only for
that slate?
For this particular slate, right? Yeah. But I would be curious on a slate like this. So I think I set my cap at like 49,400, so like leaving 600 on the table. And I
don't set a cap. I don't set a cap at all.
Yeah, it's because I'm coming from an NFL Showdown background, where that's like, for me, I think the best way to get unique and still have good lineups in NFL. I mean, there are other ways to do it too, and there are other things that I.
I mean, you could have played a lineup yesterday, and I mean, I did, that had 2 of the bigger like you could have played Jai Herbert and whoever, Kazula Vargas. Yeah, they're both at single digit owned, and then
Right.
still spend $50K of your salary and you may have, if you didn't have the main event in that lineup, that was a unique lineup. If you had the main event, maybe you got 3 dupes. I mean, like, and that spent 50,000 or 49.9. So like by setting your max cap to something, you're like eliminating all of those lineups that typically are better lineups than the 49. And there are lineups that are at 49 too that are duplicated 37 times sometimes. I mean, depending on, you know, the ownership of certain fighters, you can end up in that situation also.
Maybe this is a sport where I need to be using the ownership sum cap.
It's sneaky, not good. That's sneaky, not good either. Because you get that in Showdown. You understand that in Showdown you could play a lineup with a very high with a seemingly high ownership sum, but because you're leaving 2,800 on the table, the lineup ends up being unique or almost duped under 5. Because even though you add up all these people, it's just that, like, well, no one's leaving 22. Like, they're paying up for the other guy instead. Yeah. So like you're removing those types of lineups, and it's very similar in MMA where the hard coding way of doing it is like this past slate going, I don't want to play any lineups that have short, like one person I know, like I don't want to have any Shore Craig lineups, right? The 2 most owned underdogs. I just won't make any lineups with both of them in it. And I'm like, well, you could still make lineups with both of them in it and still be unique. It's just that you can't have the main event. You can't have Pavlov. You can't have one of the 40% owned 9K guys. You have to find it, and there are ways to do it. So by hard coding yourself out, you're eliminating those types of lines. Even though you look at the ownership sum, and you go, well, I'm playing Aspinall at 51%, and I'm playing Short at 46%. I'm playing Craig at 35%. But then you play Amirkhani at 17%. You play Elise Reed at 8%. And then, all of a sudden, you're playing Mokayev at 28%, and you're like, I spent... and it's a unique... It ends up being a unique lineup, even though the ownership sum, like, it looks like it's too high, but it really isn't.
Right. Yeah, I'm still struggling with how to get unique in MMA, and I guess it sounds like your process is pretty good, but it's also pretty advanced. It's not something that
it's not that
everybody
advanced.
can do.
But I mean, but the point I'm making is not getting unique. I'm actually refuting the point that if your ultimate goal shouldn't be to judge your lineups by uniques.
I agree, but your ultimate goal is to make the most positive EV lineups you can.
Right.
And when I say unique, I don't mean be the only one with it. I mean like under 10 dupes. Like you're still trying to make lineups that are 10 or fewer dupes. Like you're not trying to make any lineup that has 50 dupes, even if it has great probability of winning, unless it has like 90% plus chance of winning. Then maybe you can accept 50 dupes, but like
and of course I make those lineups all the time, and that's not on purpose. That's typically by accident.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's true of all of us. We make lineups that are more duped than we want them to be, but
no. But the point I'm making is that in looking at, because I like studying sharper players, so I'm studying these 150 sets, and intuitively I'm looking at certain slates going, leaving 2,000 on the table doesn't seem to be like your win probability must be horrible with these lineups, even though that's a way to get unique. And then you see some that leave max cap, like, they didn't spend more than 49.5. And I'm like, well, they missed out on a bunch of lineups that I had that were 49.7, 49.8, 5, that were unique, that I had unique lineups that were above. So I'm looking through a lot of this stuff. And then when I'm running the target score probability, I'm seeing a lot of these, depending on the slate.
Yeah.
So on a slate like we just had, like spending all your salary was more beneficial than leaving it on the table. But there may be other slates like when I won with the main event fighter not in it. Like I said, because main event fighters tend to be over-owned. They almost always are. This past slate, we had a main event fight 8,300 and 7,900. The slate before, the main event favorite was the highest priced fighter on the entire slate at 9,600 or something. So it's like yes, he wins 9 out of 10 times. But how many players does he have to compete with as far as the score is concerned? So let's say we have slates. Like, this is what I mean by slate dynamics. Let's say you have and we'll call, don't worry about the slate size, because that matters also now also. A 12 fight slate, where the main event fighter is the hot, like someone like that, but then like the other 3 9K fighters have very high win odds, but poor inside the distance lines. So you'll see like a very high, typically it's a female fight. That'll be like, the woman will be a plus 325 inside the distance, but still be a $9,300 fighter. We had Miranda Maverick. That was and I had her because she was still way underowned, even for those inside the distance odds. So they win a lot, but a lot of times they just don't finish and score a lot. The thing is, you have to compare those fighters to that main event fighter. So like, if a main event fighter is sitting up there going to be 45-50% owned, and there's 3 other 9K fighters that have ITD lines that are like 50%, plus 105, minus 150, like the likelihood of 1 or 2 of these 9K fighters outscoring a 5-round decision winner in a main event is much higher than if those inside the distance lines were plus 200, plus 250. So it's like, in those scenarios, you should be playing that main event 5-rounder more often, and the shorter odds, you should be playing them less often. A lot of times, especially in that range, you get inside the distance lines of plus 125 compared to the main event fighter. So on those slates, I typically am much under on the main event favorite, but I'm not. I'm perfectly fine with being at the field at least, or playing the main event underdog, only because their win probability compared to other fighters in their range isn't as high. So when I run that target score probability, like they get there in a win more often than the other fighters, even when they win, because at least the underdog has 5 rounds to work with.
Okay.
Right, because typically the underdog has fairly poor inside the distance line, but much better decision win equity. So that'll make up for, like having an underdog. If it's a 9K $7,200 fight, the underdog is 7,200. Like, if no one wins underneath them, or even if the $73, $74, $7,500 fighter doesn't win, like, that guy could win with an 82 and be in the optimal lineup. It's like, so like, how many points do I need? The favorite with 82 points ain't going to be in the optimal lineup at 9,000. So like, so looking at those types of dynamics, what type of slate is it? I don't think, at least from what I could tell, from studying some players, have a much more blunt, I don't want to call it blunt, but a kind of like, this is how they play MMA, and they just play like that every slate, and are likely profitable over the course of 52 weeks or whatever long period of time. But on a slate by slate level, I see that a lot of sharp players that are still profitable do not. I don't see any evidence that. At least me. I don't want to call people out or anything. I don't see any evidence that many are simulating contests.
Yeah.
So I would think that if you could actually do a contest simulation, like these types of things would come out. Like these types of things where it's like, yeah, your lineup's unique, leaving 2,600 on the table, but it still ends up being negative EV, even though, and a lineup that is duped 7 times is higher EV because it wins more often. Like
I don't think that's exclusive to MMA. I don't think that many people simulate lineups in general. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I mean, you had Brian on High Stakes,
yeah, but
right?
Brian's one of the few that I think does. I mean, I know Brian, I know Nerdy Tenor, obviously Alex, maybe Steve. But how many pros do you think are actually simulating lineups?
I don't know, but I would think it's much easier to do in MMA than in any other sport.
Well, it sounds like it. I mean, you just kind of described why.
Right. Well, that's why I said like it's so binary. I would figure golf also, like any sport where the players aren't correlated to each other, and where finishing position, like in golf, is more indicative of the total score than anything that happens in like how oh you come in third place. Most likely you got a ton of birdies. I mean like
Right.
it's not like I came in third place and was like the 28th highest scoring golfer. Like that probably isn't happening. And it's very similar in MMA where it's very correlated to to the betting lines. And like I said, the only flaw in my process is that I have no way of simulating the fight, so I can only go by an aggregate mean projection and then adjust it, scale it from there. I don't know. It's not taking into account one person's a wrestler, one person's a striker. It's not taking any. So that's a pretty major flaw from a preciseness perspective, but from a directionally accurate perspective, like the flaws would only show on a very on the extreme outliers, like a Marab. Like, I don't know if you've been to Valashvili. He doesn't win inside the distance, but he still scores 140 points in 3 rounds because he has 14 takedowns and 11 minutes of control time. So like those are the types of fighters where the inside the distance line is he's 9,300 and it's plus 300 inside the distance, and he's still going to be 48 to 52% owned. And according to those metrics, it'd be like, wow, he's wildly overowned, but he's also the highest rejected fighter on the slate, and he's not even a main event. He's not even a 5-round fighter. So it's like, but that's the main reason why I find that where that mean is, what's the middle number of all the projections, and then the further higher he gets more points. So it adjusts to the slate. So like if the middle number is 55 on everyone's projection, and someone is 85, that's 30 points, in between. But there are some slates where the fights are so much closer, or like the main event is a slow heavyweight type of fight where that person could be a 74, right? So, and because it's closer, that person isn't going to get it credited with as many points from bare base stats round by round. But guys that are like 110, it's like, dude, this guy finishes in the first round, I'm crediting him with like 132 points, right? And if he wins in 3 rounds, I'm still crediting him with like 116 points because he's getting so many points per round based on his projection. Like that isn't the precise way of doing it, but all I'm saying is that like these types of slate dynamics exist in every sport.
Sure.
And that would come out in contest-based simulations. I have no capability of, I'm barely doing it in MMA.
Yeah.
But picture a correlated sport like baseball or hockey. Like this does exist in other things, and I don't get the sense outside of people that are running contest-based simulations that this is being captured by much of the field. Like since you mentioned that if people are setting max caps and stuff, like you would never do that if you're doing contest simulations, because there's no reason why you can't find lineups that are 49.9, 50,000, especially on a 15-fight slate with enough options that like. That's the blunt method. I'm complaining. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that's the flaw in a blunt methodology.
Yeah, I mean a blunt methodology doesn't work in any sport, as far as I know.
Well, we use blunt methodologies.
In what sense?
I mean, you're not simulating anything. You're not.
Oh.
Right. You're comparing like projection versus ownership and estimating and like, to me that's a blunt, like using ownership sum or ownership product is a blunt methodology. Saying, I don't want a lineup that's an NBA on this slate that's less than 280 unless it's 160% total. Like, that's blunt. Sure. You're guessing on that.
So I guess when I say blunt methodology, I mean like setting an ownership sum cap at 140. I don't even know what the sum caps are, but like 140%, and using that number for every slate is what I meant by using a blunt methodology.
Well, I think that would be better, like a blunt strategy.
Right.
By saying no slate, no matter what basketball slate it is, I don't want more than a 220% ownership. No matter if it's a 3-game slate or a 12-game slate or this, that would be awful to do.
I follow. Okay.
Right, yes, but I'm talking about a blunt methodology on a given slate of just like, I'm just not like what you do in Showdown. I'm just bluntly not going to play any lineup over 49,000.
Right.
Like that still could be fine, but they're going to be, anytime you do anything bluntly, they're going to be gaps.
Right.
And you're willing for the sake of ease or lack of being able to do it any better way, willing to sacrifice. I'm building 150 lineups, and I know with this blunt methodology, I may end up with 20 lineups that are garbage, right?
Right.
I may not end up with the most precise set of, I may not end up with the best 150, but it's still a good 150.
Right.
Right? So it's the same thing with what I'm doing in MMA of like, yes, you'll find 10 of my lineups that are duped like 87 times, right?
Yep.
I'm trading that off for being able to find like really good unique lineups or really good under 5 dupe lineups. Because if I try to eliminate that bottom little half, I end up like not being able to find the ones that I want. Then I end up with the lineup sets where I see someone has 100. I see every slate, someone with 150 lineups, 134 uniques or something like that. And I go, how the hell did you get that many uniques? And then I take, and that's what allowed, that's why I created this type of thing. Because I kept on studying these players and I see these lineups and I go, well, here's a lineup with 3,200 left on the table. Here's a lineup with this left. Here's a lineup that has the top range fighters taking the 3 lowest owned ones with the like where their ownership sums are really low, and then still makes 49.4 in salary, and I go, okay, well that's it's possible, but you're fading like the 6 chalkiest players on the entire slate for good. And they're chalk for good reason, and hoping they all fail. And it's like, what's the probability of them all? Because this is the type of line. I look at that lineup and go, if any piece of the chalk hits, you're going to be behind. Like, I don't think you could win this solo while you have like 340+% owned guys and 50% owned guy. It's like, if 1 or 2 of these things happen, this lineup is fucking dead in the water. So how often does that happen? That's why I put together, like, what is the actual probability of that? And is it worth being unique? And then finding the lineups that are duplicated 8 times and go, what's their win probability? And obviously, you don't make as much when they win, but is it worth playing the other lineups? And to me, at least, I'm not finished. This is just kind of bare basic going through that a lot of these lineups that are, quote, unique, I don't know what their expected value is. And hey, maybe they are positive expected value. In some regard, they win once enough that it's high variance, and maybe they win one every 30 years or something, and that's worth playing.
Maybe they would be, positive expected value in a milli maker, but when there's 100,000 up top, you need to win more frequently. So
right, especially playing 150 lineups.
Right. My guess is that you're right, that they're actually negative EV lineups, and my guess is that most of my lineups are negative EV because I did really well in the dupes department this week, but I don't know how much I really.
I got to put you in then. I'll take a look because obviously I didn't choose your set because
I don't win at MMA.
Right. How is the nice way of putting it? It's like you freely admit that I'm not even sure of what I'm doing in MMA. So like, what am I going to study from you? Like, I'm studying from the people that play unique lineups, and like I'm studying from the Bryans. Right. What is he doing? What lineups does he come out with compared to mine? Look at exposures, look at ownership, and go, what types of lineups? From Brian's set seems, at least to me, that he's doing contest simulations.
Yeah, I would assume that he is. I'm trying to remember if we actually talked about that in the episode that we did on last week.
I think he was talking about MMA and PGA.
Yeah, I think
that he does
does
similar.
He doesn't even use Fantasy Cruncher. He just does it straight from the simulator.
Yeah. Right. Now that was a good conversation.
Yeah, I mean he's a really interesting player because he is pretty unique. I was a little bit nervous about having him on. I told him this, I don't know, before or after the show, that I was like, it might be a difficult conversation because I know that he is so like plays it close to the chest. He doesn't want to share.
I think the opposite, Neil.
Do you?
I think out of all of the DFS community that is at least on podcasts, and I mean visible community,
yeah.
I think he shares more than most.
I mean, he does. Like I mean, I mentioned this on the podcast. Like I feel like I've learned a lot from him. There's just certain like paths that he's not going to go down, which totally makes sense because he has a lot of, you know, proprietary stuff that only he has. So
right, he's not doing it. He could say I'm doing contest simulations, but not explain how he's doing it.
Right.
Yeah. But at least it's the type of thing where it's like he's the type where he'll say you can do this, and this is how you would approach it. But that's where I draw the line. And then now I'm not gonna do it for you, but at least you know that there is a way to get this, right? And there are many methodologies to get it this way. And they all have their pros and their cons, and they're all based around other inaccurate data that's maybe that doesn't have the highest, you know, doesn't have one R value, right? It's still there's going to be variance involved, but the fact that he could say that, oh, this is how you'd build them. He was talking about using covariates and seeing, well, this with this, like with the total points in an NBA game he was talking about. It's like, well, if you just did this, it would have no correlation. But then if you did it per like this, then it has very heavy correlation. So you have to experiment with which variables have different predictive power. And it's like, but we know plenty of sharp DFS players that would never come close to even talking in those terminologies. They would just I have my own system and I'm not going to talk about it.
Yeah, I might overestimate how much he's not willing to share, or overestimate how much other players are willing to share, just because I've seen him shut down the conversation so many times because I watch him on LOL. So like I know that he's got like pretty strong stances of like, yeah, I'm not gonna talk about that. So maybe I overestimated how much he was playing it close to the chest. And really, like the question that I asked him, or the question that I refrained from asking him, things like the variables you use in projections.
Right. He won't answer that stuff. Else. Right.
And nobody else will either. So yeah, I guess it kind of. So
but but the fact to someone like, especially the purpose of this podcast, it's the theory of daily fantasy sports. This is the game theory of playing DFS and playing DFS as a profitable player realistically. We're not screenshots and YOLO and the locks of the day type of crap. Just explaining on that there are a lot of people that don't the majority of people that have not even attempted to even cross to this side of the river to know. It's like, well, how are these players really good? And it's like, well, like, do you know how to do a linear regression? And they go, I don't even know what those words mean. Right? It's like, so it's not, so that to me, those are the three steps. And I think anything at step 2 is helpful to anyone at step 1. So just the fact of like, oh, well, I don't know how to build my own model or do any form of regression. It's like just understanding that exists and that's what sharp players do allows the people from step 1 to at least come into step 2 and go, oh, it's more than just picking players, right? Like, oh, there's a way. These numbers that I see in a projection model actually mean something. How do they get to this, and what concepts apply? Maybe they never are able to actually do it themselves, but at least it gets them into the mindset of like what I explained with the MMA slates of like every slate dynamic is going to be different. And why is that different? And what are the variables, in the slate that if it's a short slate versus a large slate, like you see in baseball, where, we'll get into baseball and people start asking about stacking. It's like, do you have to stack? And I go, more likely than not. So there's no such thing as yes or no, obviously. But the larger the slate, the more you should stack. And that's a lot of times is counterintuitive to how a lot of people think. They go, this is how they think. This is at least from what I've come across. And this will be my, third or fourth season at Roto-Grinders for MLB. So I get all the questions. So like I know what questions get asked 8 million times. People look at a 3-game slate in baseball and go, well, I'm going to play for one of the games to go nuts, and the other 2 are, 1-0 games, right? So I'm going to pick the one, like do something like that. And that's thinking too, I don't want to call it linearly, but too short-sighted of, you're not thinking probabilistically. Like on a 3-game slate, it's more likely that no team scores more than 6 runs. Right? So if you stack 5 on DraftKings, it's quite possible on a 3-game slate, no 5-man stack is worth playing. That it would have been better for you to play 3, 2,
so
2.
You and I are on the same page here. That was an interesting and not the exact same thing, but I had this conversation with Peter Viles, bro, and I think he said, and he also may have misspoke, and he was on the spot, so I don't know. But I believe he said he will only do a secondary stack on a short slate. He said, maybe on a short slate, I think I might do a secondary stack sometimes. It's also far from baseball season, so. And I was like, those are the slates where I don't set any kind of secondary stack. Like I do a short primary stack and then don't do a secondary stack on like a 2-game slate or like a 3-game slate. So I feel like he said the opposite, but maybe I misunderstood him.
No, I think we've said the same thing. I listen to that.
Okay. Yeah.
No, because on the short slates, because what ends up, but the thing is understanding the concept of it's a 3-game slate. I'm using a 3-game because it's better than 2 games. Those are tough.
Yeah,
right.
It's just chaos.
Right.
And you're going to have that's either way on a 2-game slate.
Right. So a 3 or 4-game slate where people are going to go, I'm going to play 5 on DraftKings. Right? They do 5-1-1-1 or 5-3 or whatever. They just go 5 and whatever. And the problem is that because there's only 4 games, you have to think in terms of how likely is one of these teams going to put up so many more runs than anyone else on the slate. Right? So there's only 8 teams, right? So compared to a 15-game slate with 30 teams, there's a much higher likelihood that, I don't know who it's going to be, most likely the teams with the higher team totals, right, obviously. But we got 30 chances. They're not even chances, but 30 chances for one team to just put up 18 runs. Right? To put up something that's so far above everyone else that it's more likely to happen on a 15-game slate because there's 15 games. On a 3-game slate, it could be 3-1, 4-2, and 5-3, and 5-man stacks aren't gonna come in. I mean, they could, but the thing is that on smaller slates, people are more likely to stack. So you run into not pure on a 4-game slate. You may not run into that many pure dupes. You may run into some like 5s or something or less. You probably don't run into a 78-way dupe type of lineup, but you're going to have very similar combination. Like if you stack this team this way, there's only so many combinations of this pitcher and that thing. Like, and people don't play the pitcher against the one of their one-offs. So you're limiting the combination of lineups that are possible because so many of the rest of the field, very similar to what we talked about with MMA, not understanding the slate dynamic and going, I have a one-size-fits-all approach to baseball. I have people that I've talked to that's like, I just play 5-3 every slate, right? Just on DraftKings. 5-3 or on FanDuel, they play 4-4 every slate, no matter what. Don't have to, doesn't matter if it's a 3-game slate or a 13, nope. Doesn't matter. Said it doesn't matter if we have the pricing of the pitchers, right? If we have high-end pitchers versus low, we have the slates where all the 4th starters are playing, and it's like, is any pitcher really worth 9,000 on the slate? Like, you don't take any of that into account? Nope. I said that's the problem. It's like maybe you still can generate a profit on average over the course of 200 slates, but there are definitely going to be, a good 20-25% of the slates that you play that you're seriously playing in an unprofitable way, and you're just hoping that the other make up for it. You know, like, oh, this all works. Like, they have a process that works great on 12-plus game slates, but don't work on 3-game slates. And there are people that do the opposite. Some have the approach where, oh, I do great on 3-game slates, but those 12-game slates, horrible, right? Yeah. And typically it's the strategy that they have and the process they have are really optimal for those. They don't understand it's not because they're good or bad at a certain slate type. They just happen to be good or bad because their approach of what they think how to play MLB DFS or how to play NBA DFS or whatever happens to be like the MMA, the same thing. And that's why it came back to the whole, you know, oh, you gotta build for uniques. It's like it's not all about that, and because you could say the same for Showdown of like, dude, if you want to throw in a $200 captain and 3 reserve players, you're going to be unique, but that lineup...
Which is what I did in the Dallas Cowboys game when we were all expecting the starters to sit after like the first quarter or second quarter. Mm-hmm. I put like a cap of 40,000 or something on, and I got some praise for being all my lineups being unique. And then of course they didn't sit their starters, and I was like, I didn't make a single cent on that slate. So you can see what happens when you make those wrong decisions.
Right, but I mean, you were doing that not because it's like, oh, I need to play all the guys that are only going to get one snap. Do that. Yeah. Right, you're expecting these $200 guys to actually play 3/4 of football.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right, you're not like, no, these guys, that the 6th wide receiver may only get 8 snaps and maybe gets and I want to play 6 of them. You're not thinking that. You're just assuming that the starters aren't playing.
Yeah. Yes. But the result shows what happens when you do that.
Right.
Which was you lose all your money.
Right, but also on the Showdown slates, we also have the instances where there are like two or 3 high-priced guys that are out. Mm-hmm. And then it's like it's almost impossible to build a non-dupe lineup that spends like over 48,000.
Right.
Only because you literally could play you could take the 6 whenever you could take the 6 highest priced guys and make a lineup with the highest priced guy at captain and then the next 5 highest priced guys in your flex.
Yep.
You know that lineup is going to be duplicated possibly 2,600 times.
Yep.
Right. I mean, then you get those massive dupe things, but for that slate dynamic, I can understand setting a cap, but you're setting a cap. What you technically should be doing is running the lineups and seeing where that line is. So you understand what I'm saying? Like
where you lose too much projection, or what do you mean?
No, where you're not getting where there are too many dupes. So for instance, instead of using the blunt way would be like you look at the slate and go, I'm not playing any lineup that's over 47,000, right? And showed for that type of slate where you essentially can play anyone. It's like, well, how many dupes are those lineups? I mean, like what is the line? We've created the line that in that type of slate, it's most probable that any lineup that's 49K or above is way too massively duped. Most likely. Yep. But maybe there are lineups that are 42. Maybe there's a 49-2 lineup that is, I mean, without knowing the exact slate of, the players and everything, maybe there is. So finding where that is instead of just in your head going, I'm just leaving 5,000 on the table at least, and doing like that from a blunt way makes sense. But there may be a lineup at 45-4 that's unique. There may be a lot that it's just, well, you're playing this guy instead of that guy, and this guy's 3% owned, and you're playing a kicker against the defense, or a quarterback, like an anti-correlative, a negatively correlated pairing, and it just so happens that's duped under 5 times, but it's still over your threshold of either ownership sum or salary. That what I'm doing in MMA is more likely just build all the goddamn lineups, right? That are possible, yep. And then just and see what that is, because you know how many times I get asked how much money should we leave on the table in Showdown or in MMA, and I go, yeah, if you want to get the most amount of plus EV lineups, probably probably leave X amount on the table, but you're probably going to be missing out on. There's probably on some MMA slates, if you're like, oh, I'm only going to spend 49K. It's like, dude, you've just eliminated like 2,000 plus EV lineups,
right,
out of your set. Like you could still find 150, I guess, but now you're getting to higher variance lineups also, so your swings could be even more dramatic.
Yeah.
I just don't think like thinking like that is not it. I'd rather know and then do something bluntly for efficiency purposes. To me, I think you're more like that. Like
Right.
you understand the concept of what I'm talking about, but it's like
Right.
I don't mind having 20 of my lineups being shit.
Right.
Right. Knowing that if I just set a salary cap and an ownership cap and run 150 or whatever, and do whatever, make my little adjustments or correlations or groups or whatever the hell you want to do, you're perfectly fine. I think I got 100 to 120 good lineups, and about 30 of them I may throw in the garbage, but I did it all in 8 minutes rather than having to now spend time building something myself in order to run everything in order to tell me what 20 or 30 aren't good.
Right. Exactly.
But that's a big difference.
Time efficiency. Yep.
And Brian talked about it on the podcast as far as projections are concerned.
Right. Doing his own projections versus using the industry standard and deciding those are good enough.
Right.
Right.
Which was a surprise for me to hear because, like you mentioned on the show, like 2 years ago on Lulz, he was flabbergasted that not everyone was building their own projections.
Yeah. I think he said he maybe still doesn't. He doesn't golf and in some other sports where I guess it's probably golf and MMA, probably the ones that he stimulates out. But yeah, in general, he's using the industry standard, which I've said many times. Like I used to think, we've talked about this. I used to think like if I had the time, I would do my own projections. Like I think I could figure out how to do it, and I could figure out how to do it well. And then by the time I got to that point where I was able to quit my job and I've got all the time in the world now, I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time doing my own projections. And what are the odds they're even going to be better than the projections that I get from Osmo anyway? So I don't bother.
Right. Well, that's exactly the reason why I don't either. That's like I'm not going to use Cardi's bat projections. Am I going to get better than Cardi at doing this stuff? No. He's been doing it for God knows how long. And the stuff that he does, I wouldn't need, I don't know how long it's going to take for me to learn how to pull it all. And then a lot of it is just maintaining the data. And you could fuck that up easy. I mean, you could fuck maintaining the data up. It's like, I have everything good, and then you fuck up the maintenance, and now your projections are spitting out shit where it's like why am I projecting the third center on a team for 37 points? Like, how did that happen? Right? And some line error, some comma is missing, and everything gets fucked up.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't risk that because I just use other people's projections. I guess they could potentially fuck it up, but I think they probably have more eyes on it, so not as big of a worry.
Right, and typically if you see something fucked up, someone has pointed it out.
Yeah, right.
It's like, why is this guy, why does this guy have a ceiling of 170 points in NBA? Like that's probably an error. It's probably not an acceptable part of the range of outcomes. There were some other things that Brian talked about that maybe I had an opinion on. There's something early in the podcast. I forgot about it.
Oh man, it was a long conversation. So now I have not re-listened to it yet. I usually do eventually re-listen to my old podcast, especially of these ones that I'm hosting. I go back and listen to, figure out where I can improve. I have not done that for this episode yet. So it was all, I'm trying to remember what
I know he was talking about, he was calling it game theory optimal, the balance versus exploitative stuff. Right. Like because he was listening to Nerdy Tenor, and he said he's trying to go more towards that side. Right. Oh no. What I wanted to talk about, he was talking about the correlation between player projections and ownership from a given source.
Right.
Because that's the one thing that I feel very strongly.
You feel strongly that the ownership projections are very much influenced by the point projections from a given site. So like the Osmo ownership projections, which I I believe you. Like I'm sure that is a factor, but I feel like I've come across like I just do like a dummy crunch of like 50 lineups, and I'll get a ton of a player who they only project for 5 or 10% ownership. So then I'm
Well, that's because of salary and positional constraints. So it's not an ownership thing. It's a constraint thing based on the now that you see that a lot. I always use Dorian Finney-Smith as the example.
yep.
Small forward is a shit position a lot of nights, and you'll have Dorian Finney-Smith projected for 28, right? But then you'll also have DeAndre Hunter. I'm just throwing out 4K small forwards. And if my projections have Dorian Finney-Smith 2 points higher than the next small forward, I'm going to get a ton of Dorian Finney-Smith. He's not going to be 40% owned, right? His ownership projection is 12, right? So I'm on the projection source, right? I'm on RotoGrinders using the RotoGrinders projections. It's telling me Dorian Finney-Smith is going to be 12% projected owned, yet I'm getting 45% of him in my builds because it's jamming in 2 studs and it's trying to get the highest median projection, and it needs a small forward that is around 4 to 5K, and that's the more optimal median build, and Dorian Finney-Smith just happens to project 1.5 points higher. Now, on Ultimo projections, maybe Dorian Finney-Smith is projected for 1 or 2 less minutes, and DeAndre Hunter's projected for 2 more minutes. So now Hunter's 2 points higher than Dorian Finney-Smith. Ultimo has him projected for 14% ownership, and you're getting 44% of him. And it's like, well, he's not. I don't see how he's going to be 14%. It's like, yeah, because there's another small forward there. All these small forwards in that range are going to be somewhere between 8 to 14% owned. And maybe, depending on projections around the industry, one gets skewed slightly higher or whatever. But it's not going to. It's not going to be 40% owned. The only reason the ownership exists there is because the position in and of itself is weak, and the salary makes sense based on we'll have slates where 3 guards, right? 3 point guards are out, and we have 3 4K guards that are walking into 36 minutes, right? So who's filling up your point guard spot, your shooting guard spot, and your guard spot? Those 3 guards, which means that the ownership of high-end power forwards is going to be much higher, and Embiid is going to be owned, and all that type of stuff. And now, if based on that construction, you may need a more efficiently projected player, efficiently owned player in that type of build, and that's going to come to between projection sources. The plus minus of that could be up to 4 points, right? Okay. So, like in that range, past like the top end of the obviously good value plays, right? You know, when, so-and-so's out and this guy projects for God knows 700 points at 4K, like you don't have to worry about those guys. It's in the mid-range where it's like, where if you went plus or minus 1 or 2 minutes for any of these, for a set of 6 players, could change the order 1 to 6, and different sites will have different. Okay. But the difference between those 6 players isn't that dramatic, where one should be 40% owned and the next one should be 6% owned. They're going to be like, one's going to be 14, one's going to be 10. So that's what's in like Ultimo's ownership. So
so it weights it a little bit based on the projections. But you're saying it's a difference between 8 to 14%. So there's still a lot more going into it than just their projections.
No, that's correct, but that's only due to the constraints of the problem. So the higher projected, so for instance, we'll use Dorian Finney-Smith as the example. If in that example with the small forwards, we have 6 small forwards, virtually identical. We have 3 other sources that have them all projected within 2 points of each other. So 1 to 6 is within 2 points, which basically makes them almost about even. You're going to get the guy that's the higher projected more than the other guys as you go down the list. Let's say RotoGrinders has Dorian Finney-Smith playing 38 minutes and gives them a little bit more usage. And now Dorian Finney-Smith is now 7 points higher than any of the other 5 players below him. Well, in that case, yeah, he should be 40% owned compared to the other guys at 6 or 8%. So as he further separates from that pack, the ownership will go up based on that. So if I look at Osimo, and let's say he has Dorian Finney-Smith at 5 points higher than the bunch, while Roto-Grinders only has him 2 points higher than the bunch. Well, Osimo is going to show Dorian Finney-Smith is like 28, 32% owned. Roto-Grinders is going to show at 14% owned, right? And that's a very big gap. But it's only because now it's not a 1 point difference. It's now a 4 point difference or a 5 point difference or something like that. That's all how the projections affect the ownership. And then if I go around like there are a lot of times that our projections at Roto-Grinders are a bit of an outlier with on a given player or a team. But you see that in ETR. I'll go to ETR and they'll have one guy projected like 6 points higher than like Osimo or Roto-Grinders. And yeah, that's why ETR has this guy at 38% owned. And I go, he's not going to be 38% owned. He'll be maybe 20. Maybe. Because I look at all the other sources and it's like, no, he's not that great of a value. But if you're playing cash games, you better play that ETR Optimal is going to have that guy in it. Like, that's what I mean. The ownership is and the projections have to go side by side, but in the midst of a 50K lineup with certain positional constraints. So that's what I mean by I'll go to Osimo and check the ownership versus the projections and go, is the ownership off because of a projection difference or because the ownership wasn't calculated correctly? It's not. For Osimo, it's not, for none of these sites, it's not because the ownership was calculated incorrectly. The only other factor that I could see is the projection. It's just like when one, because there are tons of times in the past at least, and you'll see this if you subscribe to like one site, you'll see this happen often enough. I'm assuming you've probably seen in the Osimo Slack, right? Someone will post in the whatever NBA channel or something. I'm not in there. I don't know. Some guy will be 32% owned on an NBA slate, and you guys had him projected for like 6% ownership, and at a fairly low projection, right? And people will go, "Why the hell is this guy 32% owned?" Right. Well, on your if that happens, it has to be because you're the outlier, not the field. That you may be the right. It's not a matter of being correct or incorrect. Maybe you projected them correctly from a player projection, but the rest of the industry didn't. Right. But that doesn't matter when it comes to ownership. So, like, the projections and the ownership have to have correlation to one another. That if you're utilizing the same and not changing anything, like how are you not running into a redundancy problem?
Sure. Yeah, no, I get it. So I agree with you for sure that there is correlation. I guess maybe I've misunderstood what you said in the past, which is that I've understood you to say that it's basically wholly based on their projections. So like the Osimo ownership projections are completely
well, it's the number. It's the top. It's the most predictive variable. It's the top variable.
Okay. All right.
But obviously, you can't jam in the 70K worth of salary. You can't play 7 centers on a slate. So, like, the ownership, if on a FanDuel, for instance, all of the center ownership, but now there's multiple position eligibility, but in the past, right, when you could only play one center, the total amount of center ownership could be 100%. They can't be any more than that, right? So you could have, we have 6 centers today that are projected for 7 million points. But you can only play one, so like it's not going to be, well, this one is 7,000,001, so he's going to be 99% owned. Like, no, they're all going to be owned, and it's probably going to be, if you had 5 centers projected for 7 million points, they're probably going to be owned around 20% each, right? 19% each. Some people will try to get contrarian and play one of the not 5 of those guys and whatever, but according to the rest of the players on the slate, if you didn't look at position, you'd be like, well, I want to play all 5 of these guys. But you can't because they're only eligible at one position. If they're on DraftKings, if you have 4 point guards, right? They're a point guard only, right? You can't play all 4. You can only play 3 at the max on DraftKings, right? You can only play 2 on FanDuel. So the ownership has to come down, even though the values look good. And you wonder, well, this guy does. Then you look at the 5-7 million point centers, and they're all 20% owned. And then you look at Dorian Finney-Smith, and he's projected to be 40% owned. And you go, but Dorian Finney-Smith doesn't even. It's like he's okay. It's like, yeah, because small forward sucks, and he's the best small forward by 2 points more than. So like, obviously that affects all ownership percentages around the entire industry. But once you take that away, then if Osimo, for instance, has this 10K studs projected low, obviously the ownership of cheaper players is going to be down.
Yep. Right?
Because it's not as valuable to plug in Durant and LeBron and Luka, right? Because they're, our Roto Grinders has Luka at 58 and you guys have him at 52. We have Durant at 56 and you have him at 48. So it's like those extra points, it makes it worth it to throw in some $3,500 player in or 4K player in. So our ownership would look like, well, because you're jamming in Durant and Luka, well, these cheaper small forwards and power forwards or whatever are going to be more owned. But on Osimo, let's say you take 6 points away from those studs, then it's like, well, those 4K players that Roto Grinders have at 14% owned, you have at 4% owned, but you also have like Kevin Durant at 14% owned and not 30% owned, and you have more of the 6K, 7K guys. Right now, next thing you know, you have Jaylen Brown at 20% owned, while on Roto Grinders we have him at 8% owned.
Right.
But still, that adjustment for the constraints is still all based on the projections, because that's what's going to lead the way, because the projections across Osimo, ETR, Roto Grinders are going to at least drive that to some extent. How much? I mean, that you kind of have to figure that out. But that's what I mean. So if you just solely go by, unless there's a way to adjust for that, unless they're doing something that I don't see it.
I mean, maybe, I don't know if they're looking at the other sites. Like I know you do. You look at multiple sites to kind of figure out ownership. Theoretically, the sites could do that too. Like, there's no reason.
Yeah, but I could tell you they're not.
Okay.
Because it wouldn't make, some of these things wouldn't make any sense otherwise.
Okay.
Because I looked primarily across 3 sites, which is Roto Grinders, ETR, and Osimo. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of times that the ownerships on some players are dramatically different. Dramatically enough different. Where Roto Grinders, we have someone at 22%, ETR has them at 40%, and Osimo has them at 18%. I go, but you know the reason why? Because ETR have them 3 points higher projected, right? I mean that it always comes down to something like that. And then in combination with someone else that fills a different position that they have 3 points higher projected also, right? It's not just one thing. It's always some type of construction thing that causes different players to now, based on that. So if you're off on one projection, if we head into a slate, if you put Dorian Finney-Smith on a weak small forward slate and just decide to give him a 100-point projection, like he's going to be in all of your lineups, mm-hmm. and he's going to fill that small forward only position or something, whatever it is, and then everything else is going to adjust to it. If you put Dorian Finney-Smith's projection at 0, the ownership of all the other positions changes now also, right?
Right.
So getting the more that a projection is an outlier compared to the rest, the more the ownership projections they have to be off,
right? Based
on that. But so that's what like Neil, you mentioned that's why I look at the sites. That's exactly what I'm trying to estimate when I change ownership for all the players that are in my pool, by going and looking and going, Not just look, I can aggregate them together, but that's not real. That's a blunt way of doing it. But it's more the fact of like, well, where are the outliers and how do the outliers affect everything? I see like one side has this guy 6 points higher. There was one slate last week that ETR had Jonas Valanciunas like 6 points higher than like everyone else.
Okay.
And they had him at like 36% owned, and like we had him at 6% owned. Right? Everyone was paying down at center on that slate. And I didn't get, but so I look, and I can't aggregate the the ownership projections based on that. Because how much, yes, I'm going to bump up Valanciunas because people still look at those projections and still may use an aggregate. So I know he's not going to be 6% owned. Maybe it'll be 10% owned. Maybe it'll be 12% owned or something like that. But now I have to use that to, if I have to bump him up 6 points, how does that affect all the other players? If you're playing Jonas Valanciunas more, that means the cheaper centers, I have to move down 2 points in ownership, right? And that means the high-priced guard, I have to move down 2 points because it's money that's why you're playing a cheap center, so you can pay up for 2 guards, right? So you have to move all that. If I just said, well, I'm just going to move Valanciunas from 6 to 12, well, how does that affect the constraints of everything else in your lineup? So this is a long-winded way of like me like, I don't want to say winning the argument of if a site has a player projection off, and it could be that they're right. I'm not saying off as a bad word, right? That is significantly different than everyone else. Their ownership projections are almost have to be different than everyone else, unless they somehow are utilizing everyone else's site's projections to make that ownership, which I don't see that happening.
You're saying that it is the weightiest variable, essentially, in ownership projection.
Yes,
the
correct.
site's projection. You're not saying that it's 100% correlative, because obviously there are players that, like, if I just put them into run a crunch with 150 lineups, occasionally, somewhat frequently, I'll get a player that I get 100% of based on the projections of all of their players in the pool. And they're not going to project that player for 100% ownership. So there are other factors that go into an ownership projection, the ownership projections that these sites are doing. You just think that this one is the highest weight.
Right.
They weight their projections. Okay.
Right.
I can accept that. Right. I don't disagree with that.
Right, which is why I say it's a flaw, that it's at least somewhat of a flaw to only use player projections and ownership from one site. From one site. Source. Right.
Okay.
Right. That's that. But of course, I'm biased because I'm talking from someone that comes from that approach, where the ownership number is almost more important to me than the player projection number.
Yeah, I mean, I come from that approach too. So so maybe I should be looking at more than one site for ownership projections.
And also, I think we're going to see in baseball this year, because I noticed it last year. You're going to have to build, at least in your mind, some type of anti-competitive mentality into your process. I noticed last year, especially come June, July, I mean, maybe not in the very beginning, because this happens in every sport, but I mean, it's much more evident in baseball. People look at stuff like the top stacks tool.
I remember you saying that in an interview last year, that it was becoming, everybody was using it. So it was kind of, everybody was playing the top leverage stacks by the end of the season. So yeah. Right.
You'd enter a slate and it'll be like, oh, it looks like the Dodgers are under owned. And then they literally come in efficiently owned. Like, oh, they're going to be 5% owned as a stack, and they come in at 13%. It's like, why did I play a ton of this? Yeah, because everyone's looking at the same fucking thing.
And that could explain my season last year, because I had a really strong April, May, June, July, and then petered out in August, September. I did terribly in it, and that's probably just variance, but that could also explain it. If it's everybody else is looking at the same stuff that I've been using all season, the field is adjusted, and now I'm just doing the same thing as the field, and not really setting myself up to win as well as I was early in the year. It was just like I would use the top stacks, and that was the tool that I was using every day. And I had a lot of success with it early in the season. And by the end of the year, it was like the last 2 months were just terrible for me. So
yeah, I remember one slate last season where I think it was a slate with the Braves because I remember it so distinctly that the Braves were like projected across the industry, so it wasn't just Awesemo, as like 9% owned or something like that. And they were like on Awesemo, they were literally the top stack. Like they were the most probable stack at like 17% win probability. And then on Slate IQ and Roto Grinders, they were like the third in win probability, but the highest leverage stack, even at 9. And it was like 8.8%. Like you look across, and it's like everyone is projected the Braves at this ownership, and it being the highest win probability under-owned team. And then it locks at the 7-10 game. It locks, and Ronald Acuna is like 27% owned. Freddie Freeman's 23. Ozzie Albies is 21. I'm like, what the fuck? And they literally were the chalk of the entire slate by far. I mean, like mega chalk. Like they were over-owned. They went from being the highest leverage stack to being the lowest leverage stack in the course of like a lock hit. And I said. Well, why did this? That's the only reasoning behind it. So then from that day forward, I always had to like weigh in anti-competitive. If something looks too, it's almost like if something looks too good to be true, it probably isn't going to be as true as you think.
Right. But I felt like early on, I was having a lot of success using the top stacks tool and using the leverage in creating my stacks. And
as long as you get the leverage, I mean, but that's the main thing.
Yeah. So early on, it was working out well. Hopefully they'll adjust to, no, there's no real way. How do you adjust to knowing that everybody else is going to adjust what they're doing based on what you say?
Ask Nerdy Tenor. He knows how to do it.
Yeah, that's true. Nerdy Tenor might be able to do it.
Well, his algorithm knows how to do it.
Yeah.
That was the most interesting to me. I still think that was the best episode of this podcast. It's really long, 3 hours or so.
Yeah. It defeated my record as the longest guest for you.
Right.
At the time.
Yeah, but when he was talking about building the anti-competitive stuff into his algorithm, I'm like that now because that was the main thing that because he doesn't make his own of any projections or anything. He's just like, I'm just going to shove all these numbers in and let the algorithm tell me what are the best lineups, and then they compete against one another. So it's like it's trying to the lineups are trying to exploit each other inside of this, and then he gets X amount, and then he takes 150 or whatever. He starts eliminating and crunching them down. Like conceptually, I understand what he's doing.
Right.
I can't possibly do that.
Because another thing that Brian and I talked about was I was like, yeah, you're afraid of giving away this stuff. And I'm like, nobody else is going to be able to do what you're doing anyway. Like, even if we understand what you're saying, I don't know how to do what you're doing. And as he said, well, we're not the guys that he's worried about. He's worried about the nerdy tenors who could listen to what he's saying and say, oh, that makes sense. I know how to do that. I'm going to build that out.
Right. He doesn't want to create monsters.
Yep.
Right.
As he says.
But I mean, he mentioned my belief of that you vastly underestimate how many stupid people there are.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Vastly underestimate.
Yep. But that is also a difference in the stakes that he plays at. So if you create one monster in a field of 100, that's a bigger deal than in a field of 30,000 entries. Right.
But he's still, I mean, I'd rather not create more 150 maxers to eat up plus EV lineups in a contest. Of course not. But I still go by the fact. Well, I think truthfully, I think the difference between Brian and this is weird to say. I 100% agree with Brian. Even though I'm arguing from the other side, the difference is that I'm compensating for that through doing this.
Right.
So what
am I doing here?
Well, you're at awesome. So the explanation is like, Brian's like, I don't want to give as much away because I don't want to create less of an edge for me in the contests, which I agree with completely. When I was at the poker table, I would never teach at the table. I don't discuss strategy at the table. I don't want to give any. I want to look like the fucking schmuck like everyone else is, right? And I'm getting lucky or something, right? Off the table, sure, whatever. the thing is that like I'm 100% transparent. I have to call myself. I'm 99% transparent because obviously the MMA stuff I can't. But people are like, oh, how do you get to your rating number? It's like you could, if I gave you those numbers, you'd be able to make just. It has nothing to do with even if I'm right or wrong. You just end up getting to a lot of. I'd end up with duplicates now that I didn't think were going to be duplicates, and even if your numbers are, and I'll post my like rankings, like here's all the ratings, but not the ratings, just the order of which they're in.
Yep.
And people will compare and go like, yeah, based on my calculation. This guy's over-owned, this guy's under-owned. Yeah, we're both on like kind of the same page. But if I gave you the exact number, you just plug that fucking thing into lineup HQ, and I'd end up with instead of me having 70 uniques, I'll only have 10 uniques, right? I'll only have another unique. You know, it'll be 2 or 3, so it's not horrible. But like, there's a reason I don't want to give out the exact numbers. But everything else, I don't mind sharing. But the only difference is I'm getting paid for doing so. Right, so like from a monetization method of like, okay, I'm going to be giving away an edge, but I'm also charging $125 for a course. I'm also getting paid to do a daily show on Roto Grinders. I do, other work for Roto Grind. I mean, like, so that edge that I'm losing, whatever, am I getting it back or more from that? I mean, I enjoy being transparent. I enjoy teaching. So I mean, but Brian, like what is the monetization method of lulls? Like nothing. It doesn't seem like seems like lulls. I mean, they can still I have a jersey. I have a lulls jersey.
Yeah, that's right. Forgot about that.
Right. Pete has one. I might as well send this to Brian because I'm never gonna wear this.
He won't either. Maybe he will because it's.
But at least it's something that has to do with their show or something.
Yeah.
I sent one that
on the wall or something.
Right. I made one as a joke after his whole spiel about he doesn't understand why people wear other people's jerseys. Right.
Yep.
You're not that person. So I'm like, so I made then he made the DFS. Oh, if I had a DFS jersey, so I made a DFS jersey. It's like it's worth it. It costs $60 to make, and it's good quality. So I thought as $60 for lulls, I'll do it. And then when I told Peter I was doing it, it's like Peter's like, "Can you make? I want one." So I'm like, so I got one and then shipped it off to him. So whatever like that. But it's like maybe I should have just gotten one for Pete because I just have it hanging up here, and I don't know. I don't see myself ever wearing it. I don't want to wear basketball jerseys to begin with.
Right.
So maybe I should just send it to Brian.
Yeah, maybe he'll appreciate it.
So anything else going on your end?
No, not really. Yeah, from a DFS standpoint, I'm ready for baseball season. I'm excited it's coming back. I just got a message actually from Nolan in Slack, head of content at Awesemo, asking me if I do MLB DFS, which I assume means do you want to do MLB DFS content? So maybe I'll do some MLB DFS content at Awesemo. I'll have to think about that. I feel like I could. Like NBA is the one sport that I'm like, I can't really do live before lock. Like it's not feasible for me to be the way that I make lineup so close to lock. And I do it kind of crunch in and I'm like hyper focused. NBA I couldn't do it, but I think MLB I could potentially. So maybe you'll see me if you watch Awesemo MLB streams. Maybe I'll do some.
Yeah, I do MLB for like road grind. I don't mind. I do the morning grind with Stevie. Probably like maybe 2 or 3 times a month or whatever. Like, and we record that like at like 11 or midnight the night before. Like, I don't mind doing that for baseball. I mean, typically, it's still gonna apply for basketball. What's the point? I mean, I'm of course I'm saying this while Roto Grinder still does a morning grind for basketball, but that's something to like leisurely listen to in the morning as a podcast, and then kind of go like, well, most of this stuff it's probably gonna have to throw it out anyway. But I don't mind doing grinders live for base. Like to me, baseball, most of the stuff. By the time we do a show at like 5 o'clock, 5:30 or so Eastern time, a lot of the lineups are in. You get a lot of the dynamic of the slate. You could look up, top stack, slate IQ, and you look at the like, oh, this team's going to be underowned, or this position is weak. You probably play a one-off here. Like there's more like game theory you could talk about,
right? That
isn't going to change 30 minutes from that. Like, I mean, in basketball, geez, I mean, like, within 5 minutes, literally, everything about the slate, we were talking about slate dynamics, right? That's the key thing about basketball is, like, You can go into a slate going, yeah, it's going to be this type of slate with you're mostly going to pay up here and pay down there, and then like this guy's out, all those dynamics are gone.
Suddenly becomes a stars and scrubs slate. Like previously, it was like, you just play the middle, and then now you can play the most expensive guys because this player's out, and now there's such great value on that team. Yeah, everything changes. So
right, and the positions matter, right? You get all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're playing a double center build because it's like you got two centers that are 4K too cheap. So it's like, okay, that's kind of the build that but you would never imagine doing a show at 4:45 and going, yeah, here are all my thoughts for 45 minutes on the slate dynamics and everything, and then Joel Embiid out, right?
Yeah.
Right. Next thing you know, Giannis is out. Jokic isn't playing. It's like, well, what?
Yeah.
What was the point of the past 45 minutes?
You know what my biggest worry is with doing MLB content is being held to what I say. So like, I feel like with NFL sometimes, because I did the show on Saturday, I talk about like, I think I want to be around this % of this player. Like I want to go well over the field on this player, just based on like, I would look at the tools that also I would look at the boom bust tool and stuff. But then sometimes the day of, as I'm building my lineups, I'm like, oh, but I find this really interesting. I don't know, like things kind of change for me as I'm thinking about the slate more and more. I'm always kind of changing what I'm doing. I worry about saying something and being like, oh, I really don't like this stack, and then later on kind of changing my mind about that. And I don't know.
Well, that's why you have to change your terminology, Neil.
Yeah, maybe I do.
But don't say you like any. That's why. Who do you like? I don't know anyone. I don't know. Who do I like? Yeah. What does that mean?
I mean, so I guess I don't really do that, but I say like I would expect that I'm going to be over the field on this player or under the field. I don't know. So, so I do stuff.
Yeah, but also I don't even talk like that.
No.
Right. Because I don't talk in terms of exposures. So like, just build good lineups. To me, if anything, like you could say, I believe this player is underowned. I believe this player is overowned. Yeah. Now, how many lineups that player fits in? That's none of a viewer's concern. I mean, you could say like that's why those terms. It's like I don't like. If you ask me who I like, I'd be like, well, whatever players end up making plus EV lineups more than others, and those players, from my perspective, happen to be these players. But I don't like having it determined as the word like, because people then will say like, meaning I think that player is going to do well, which is nothing of the sort of what I'm saying, right? So that's why I avoid those types of terminologies and say for exposures, I explain on being above the field. Well, what does that mean, right? How much above the field, and what does that mean to someone else that, well, what if I'm playing 3 lineups? Because they don't understand. All you're doing, I understand what you're saying, because you're saying the same thing that I'm saying. I believe this player is underowned, which means I believe I'm going to get him in more of he's going to make up more of my plus EV lineups than other players. Whether that ends up being 40% or 10% or whatever, it's just a product of your diversification. But when players here, you don't want to be stuck in the position where it's like, yeah, I'm going to play a lot of that guy, and you end up playing 8% of him, right? Because nothing's changed or anything, but it only had, yes, he's underowned, but not that underowned, and he fit in a position here, and I'm going to be playing these 2 pitchers and stacking this team, so I can't, like, it's a $5,800, it's a Juan Soto, and you're not even stacking the Nationals much, right? So it's like, yeah, he's underowned, but I'm playing a lot of this expensive pitcher and this expensive stack also, so I don't end up with much Juan Soto. Even though Juan Soto's 4% owned and you have 8% of him, you told someone you're going to have a lot of guy, and they're going to look at you and go, well, you only had 8%.
You lied to me. You're holding back.
Right. You held back. You deceived. You were doing that because you were going to try to raise his ownership artificially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
That's the kind of stuff you get, right?
Right, of course. You know exactly. I mean, just like what, Greg? Greg, if anything happens with Draymond Green, he's the expert, right? Right?
Yeah.
With Steve Kerr, right? He knows before the team does.
Yeah. He didn't adjust his lineup, so that's because he doesn't want you to know. Yeah,
that was my favorite. Yeah. You can't win with those types of people. That's a pure conspiracy theory type of mindset. Because anytime, if you're a hardcore conspiracy theorist, the absence of evidence is the evidence. And then you're just like, then you might as well just throw yourself out. Just throw yourself off a roof at that point. Right.
Yep.
Like, well, if he knew, how come he was in all of his lineups? He said, just so he'd make sure that he didn't. Like that doesn't make any. The most common thing is that he didn't know, and he got screwed too.
I would say poor Greg for having to deal with that, but I feel like Greg just loves that, eats that shit up. So
does he?
I think so.
I think Adam doesn't. Adam like it more.
Yeah, I mean they're different, but I feel like they both kind of like it. But, I think Greg with his comedy background loves just like making jokes at these people's expenses.
Right. Adam just insults. Adam will just say you're a fucking idiot.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty combative site that I work at, isn't it?
No, why isn't it? It's not that combative.
Yeah, I guess just those two for the most part.
How's the Slack? Are you guys ever going to be on Discord? What are we doing with Slack?
Discord. It's actually on Discord now. The company is on Slack. So like
the company's so Awesome now has a Discord.
Yeah, Awesome has a Discord.
Oh, then I got to get in there to see if anyone's shit talking me.
Yeah, I'm always shit talking you in there.
Oh, good.
No, I don't go in the Discord that much. I got recently Rinpack DM me and was like, "Hey, somebody wanted to find you in the Discord," so I went into the Discord that day. But like, I don't spend a lot of time. I don't really like Discord that much. I think I just don't quite get it yet. It's just too busy. Like I've got a million different conversations going on. And I've got like one-on-one conversation. Then I've got all these people spamming me NFTs, and then I'm in 20 different Discords. So I think that I really haven't fully bought into Discord as much as most people have at this point.
You have to customize it. You have to set, I've muted channels, only at mentions. Like I'm pretty much into I'm in a ton of Discords, and it's like anyone, I'll know when I get mentioned, right? If someone has a question or someone talking about or something like that, and I could, depending on the day, like Saturday afternoons, I'm in the MMA channels of all the Discords, right? And I may not even be posting. I mean, is there any news? Is there anything worth anything or whatever? I mean, just hanging out during the fights or something. And then Saturday morning, like I'm in the RotoWire soccer Discord, right? I mean, like, because that's where more of the soccer people are. I mean, like, so I bounce around and stuff like that, but like, you don't have to set it so that you get like any type of visual, like I got to read everything in every channel. It's like, dude, no, like I'm not playing college football. There's no reason for me to even have I'll just mute the entire channel and it won't even show up in the list.
Yeah, right. That's probably what I need to do. Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you leave everything open, it'll be fucking chaos.
And that's what I've got. I mean, I have turned off some channels because there was some channels where I would get like the @ everyone, like every minute there'd be a new @ everyone, and I'm just like, I don't want to hear any of this shit. But then there are some, I guess like for Awesome, I want to hear when there's breaking news, like when News God over at Awesemo has breaking news, says this player's in or out. I want to get those notifications, but I don't want to get all of the @ everyone notifications. So I don't know. It's
you could configure some stuff. There's ways to do stuff.
And maybe I want to get just the ones that are at me specifically. I don't know if there's a way to configure that.
That's a main option. Just all at mentions.
You're right. I just need to go in and
right.
I had somebody message me. I was like, hey, can I message you on Discord sometime? Somebody sent me a Twitter DM, and I was like, just message me here. Like I'm on Twitter, throughout the day. So like, if you want to talk to me, just DM me on Twitter. I'm a lot more likely to respond.
Right. I have Discord DMs off friends only.
Okay.
Because I used to, what would happen too much is that I'd get direct messages from RotoGrinders people. Should I play this guy or this guy? Should I do that? Said, just mention me in the channel. That's the NBA channel. That's the don't because at least if it's public, someone else could. It doesn't have to be me, right? It doesn't I'm not. Who knows where I am? Like just doing it. You could still tag me if you want, but just don't do it in the messages where I get a different notification where it's like, why is someone direct messaging? And yeah, my Twitter DMs are open, but a lot of times when people ask me there, I say go to the Discord. I mean, like what you have a spot. It's not like I'm not available, right? Just and I was getting too much, like you said. You're probably getting spam stuff, but like. Yeah. And then I'll just get and what'll end up happening is some random person is like friend request, and I don't even know who that person is, and I just X them out, I just ignore, right? And it's like, I'm sorry. I can't deal with 17 messages a day from people that could just be posting in the main channels of the Discords that they're in. Right? To just, do you think this guy's going to play tonight? Why you messaging me? Just post it in the NBA chat. Just post it in there.
Yeah.
Right? Like that. And that's why I have my own channel on the Road to Grinders Discord. So now I even have a more itemized spot. Right? Because people would have general questions about DFS, but not know what channel to post them in. Right? It's like, I have a question about Bankroll Manager. I have a question about something that's not like tied to a sport. And they're like, do I just mention you in the NBA channel because it's NBA season? So it's like, no, just now I have a game theory channel. Just go there. I respond to literally everything. Right? It may not be immediate, obviously, because I'm maybe in the middle of something. But you post a question there, just like if you DM me or you on the pregame show, I respond. And I do the Zoom calls, the group coaching, weekly or something like that in there. But yeah, if you said it to friends, like, you're the one, Neil, that has to, it shouldn't be on other people to dictate how you organize your communication. They need to cater to you. You don't need to cater to them.
Yeah, which is why I told the guy on Twitter, just message me here. I mean, that's in general what I do. I just tell people where I'm going to be, and a lot of people are like, I don't want to waste your time, and I'm like, well,
you're already wasting my time.
Well,
you just say that.
What I usually tell people is, I'm willing to answer questions. I might not get back to you right away. It might be a few days sometimes. Usually not, but like, just understand that I'm not like, don't worry about wasting my time. I'll answer your question. You can't expect me to respond right away because I'm busy, or sometimes I just don't feel like it right away. I don't want to go through my Twitter DMs. Like, I'm going to get back to you when I get back to you. But if you can accept that I'm just going to get back to you when I get back to you, then ask away. I don't care.
Right. But I'm not going to do it on 17 platforms at once. Like, I don't.
Right. Yeah.
Just that's the thing that it's like, this is where I'm comfortable. If someone's like, well, I'm always on Discord, I'm never on Twitter. It's like, that ain't my problem.
Right.
That isn't my problem. That's your problem. Right. I'm telling you where I am. I don't have to go where you are. Right? Are you paying me directly? If you're paying, if you said, I'm going to pay you this much and you come up, fine. Okay. That was the agreement. But other than that, like, people, Facebook Messenger, it's like, how old are you? Facebook? Right. What are we doing on Facebook?
What's funny is that's the only way that I interact with my wife. We don't text. We just use Facebook Messenger for some reason.
But at least you know that. See,
but that's like our dedicated. Yeah, like I don't do that with anybody else. So like typically.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't give anyone in like the DFS space, like use subs or anything like that, like my phone number for texting.
Right.
It's all text. Just text in the place where we're texting. Just text. That's why we have a place. So just do it there.
Yeah.
Don't do it in my personal space. Right? I've had people that I cleaned out my Facebook following. Because I would have random DFS people and I was at the point where just anyone is fine. And I just closed. I closed that to Instagram. I'm done. Right? I deleted all my photos from Instagram, which my last photo wasn't, I think, 4 years ago or something.
Yeah.
So basically, Facebook and Instagram are might as well. I mean, yeah, I still have a Facebook profile, but you're basically it's all private, and I think I have 13. I curtailed it all the way down to like 13 friends, and basically, it's the list of people that like that they have my number. They would call me on the phone and go, "You want to go to a movie today?" Like type of people. Like no one. I remember them in the third grade. Like none of those fucking people.
I've got a lot of those people.
Right.
See, I mean, and that's kind of how I treat Facebook at this point. I'm not posting anything personal really on Facebook. It's just like this is where you can see what people from your past are up to, and that's what Facebook is, as far as I'm concerned. But
I'm controlling it in the fact of like, I could see that, but you can't see me. Right. Yeah. So it's like I could be on Instagram and I could follow people, but you have zero photos. You have no clue. Like I have 0 followers. I'm zero nothing. It's like I'll go on Instagram and watch funny wrestling stuff or like stuff like that. So I could view, but like I'm not making any posts. You can't see what I've liked. I don't touch the like button at all. right? Only because the way that Facebook operates, or Meta, whatever you want to fucking call it.
Right.
Basically, I got to the point where I left stuff open enough. I mean, private information is private information, but enough where it's like I'm not really active on these platforms, so they're just kind of like sitting there, kind of. I'm in Facebook groups. I'll post in Facebook groups that I'm in, right? But I'm not posting in general. But it gets to the point where like the usefulness of these platforms has become so minimal to me that I might as well just like, why am I saving photos of a potato knish box from 2015 on my Instagram? Like, I'm just like, there's no usefulness of this to me. And there's no usefulness of anyone else to follow me. And also, if you're following me, that means you get access to everything in my profile. So it's like, if someone breaks into your stuff, they can get into my thing. And that's how you can learn everything about anyone anyway, because people have their shit too open, right? Yeah. So it's like the biggest culprit of leaving shit too open is Facebook. So just like, since I have no usefulness anymore, just like, fuck you. Like, I don't have to delete the profile, but the only connections I have are from people that I trust eminently.
Yeah.
That, like, if you're a friend of my friend, okay, then you could see a little bit more. You could see some posts, but if you're not even close to that, you'd like. And these are posts from whatever Twitter. I bombed my account from like 2017 below, so I deleted every tweet.
Wow. From
like 2017. I did this a while ago. Because
saying a lot of racist stuff back then.
I don't know. I mean, I was a comic. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe something that could be taken.
I suppose the fact that you were a comic, you probably did leave yourself more open to.
Right. Exactly. So it's like, why am I? No one's reading these. What do I need this? So let me just delete everything. 2017. Just do all of that.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
No.
But you could follow you, right? People could follow you. Player Q DFS on Twitter.
You can.
And you could probably use your information to find your Facebook profile.
You could. It's just my name. Right. I'm the only person
as far as and you have another Twitter profile.
I do have another Twitter profile.
But you don't.
I don't use that one at all anymore. It's actually.
But that should be the one that you do use? It's literally your name.
It is, yeah.
Right.
which is why I keep it. I don't know.
So you keep that one for the case, just in case when you're done with DFS, you could just use that one.
My old one. Yeah, I guess.
Typically, it's more valuable to have just your actual name without an underscore or anything. It's just Neil Orfield.
True.
And just use that.
Yep.
I don't know. But of course, I've used my name, my username for multiple industries. I mean, it's the people that knew me as a tech person and podcaster from 2012 just don't follow me anymore. Because it's like, why am I following the dude that I haven't heard from in 8 years and doesn't even talks about fantasy sports all the time?
Right.
And posts gifs of the cartoon guys with the money in the furnace. Like, what the hell is that going to do?
Right.
And then you can follow me at BlenderHD. And I'm gonna join the Awesemo Discord.
You should.
I mean, I'm not gonna post there or anything, but I'm just.
Maybe I'll be there occasionally.
I'll join.
Maybe eventually I'll get in there regularly.
I'm expecting to see that gif of the guy that walks in with the pizza box, and like it's a fire and shit's going on, right? Like that type. That's what I'm expecting.
Right. I mean, any Discord, any DFS Discord.
Well, that's what I said. I'm in every. I mean, if it's available, and I'm an Awesemo subscriber, right? I subscribe to everywhere. I might another one to go in my list on the sidebar of places that I barely look at.
We'll check out the theory subcategory in the Roto Grinders Discord.
There's not much going on. Typically, it's me posting messages of when the next Zoom call is, and occasionally, then someone will post a question, and then there's a conversation.
Okay.
But that's like to me, that's my inbox, right?
Right.
So when people are like, "Oh, do you do private coaching? Can you help me with like?" So you sign up for Roto Grinders, you join the Discord, and there's access to me and text questions and weekly Zoom calls. I don't. What else do you want from me?
Right.
How much more can I give? Other than my MMA rating numbers.
That's all the people really want.
Yes. Okay, doke. So we're done. You don't even know this yet. Next week, Cardi's gonna come on.
On this show.
Yes. It's
Nice.
baseball starting. Cardi, I use the bat. Typically, I like having a conversation with him of what's changed this year. Any ballparks are different. Anything is the ball not round anymore? You know, like all that type of stuff.
I'll listen to it.
Right, and then the week after that, I'll be at WrestleMania.
Okay.
So then we'll come back. So you get a 3-week vacation.
All right. So we're gonna
but
totally
just to be clear, you are getting a paid vacation.
I'm getting. Oh, thank you. Are you doubling my salary for this one?
Right. You're getting time and a half or something.
Nice.
Right.
All right.
So you're getting 2 times 0 instead of 1 times 0.
Awesome. Perfect.
And put that toward your MMA entries.
I will. Thank you.
And as always, you get the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass that you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com.